What's up, Vessel Youth? We are so excited that you guys are here for another Wednesday night with Vessel and to hear another amazing message from Trey about hearing God's voice, perseverance in challenging seasons, and really leaning into Him and seeking His face and His presence and trusting Him in the process, step by step, as we walk deeper into our faith together. We are so excited that we're able to meet in this way, and if you are just now coming on, drop a hey, hi, hello, how are you in the comments. We love hearing from you, and we love chatting with you, and we love just getting your feedback on the things that God's teaching you and throughout the sermon, the things that are highlighted to you, the things that are jumping out at you, the things that you are just finding and loving as Trey sharing his message. And we love how God has been speaking to you guys in this season. Oh my goodness. We have had story after story and testimony after testimony of just different breakthroughs and transformations and how God has been moving in your hearts, the things that He's been teaching to you and speaking to you, and the things that He's been doing in your lives. We love meeting with you corporately. We love being able to meet with you at church, but also you don't need a building to encounter the love of Jesus. You don't need a building to encounter the one true living God. And it has never been more evident than now hearing how God has been speaking to you and moving through your lives and growing in your faith. And we have loved hearing all of the stories and testimonies of God's goodness and His faithfulness and how He's been moving in your lives. He did not build this temple with human hands, but He has set His Spirit within our hearts to dwell within us. And so we get to experience that day to day and a moment by moment, second by second relationship with Him. And so it's been really cool. So if you have a testimony that you want to share with us or something that God has done in your heart and your life that you feel comfortable sharing with us, we would love to hear from you. And don't worry, you don't have to share it. It doesn't have to go here publicly. If you want to share it with others, you can. If you just want to share it with us, that would be awesome. But feel free to reach out and let us know because we love hearing how God has been moving in your lives. Also, we have so many seniors who are getting ready to step into a new season and phase in their life, a new journey that's a big transition of going into college. And one thing that we've asked each senior is that they would take a second to just leave some wisdom or advice or scripture or something that they've learned that they want to leave behind with you guys. And so today we have Mason sharing with us some advice and some wisdom that he's learned in his journey of faith that he would like to share.
What's up, Vessel Youth? It's Mason Miles. I'm a senior at Metropolitan Christian Academy, and I was asked to give you guys some advice. And I want to give you advice on perseverance and kind of adding off of what Trey was talking about last week, just about going through dry seasons. And you cannot prevent dry seasons. Everyone will go through these seasons, but it's only to show the consuming fire of God and how the drier the wood gets, the hotter the fire gets. And when we go through dry seasons, that's what Jesus wants to do. He wants to burn us up with His consuming holy fire. And when we're consumed with that fire, He burns up all addictions, all temptations, and just all sin away. Like, He burns it all away when we're on fire for Him. And then we'll go through another dry season. I've been through this so many times. I understand that when we go through another dry season, we get caught in that temptations. And that's when Satan really wants to tempt us. He tries to tempt us in the dry seasons, and he tries to bring us further away from God. But I think it's important to persevere and seek the Lord even through those dry seasons. Psalm 77, 1-6. I encourage you guys just to meditate on this. It says, I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands, and I would not be comforted. I remembered you, God, and I groaned. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the years of long ago. I remembered my songs in the night. My heart meditated, and my spirit asked. And he goes on talking about how the Lord, will you reject me forever, Lord? Where's your unfailing love? I thought you were compassionate towards me. And then he's like, even though I'm not seeing you work, even though I'm not feeling your presence. Even though I'm not feeling comforted, I'm still going to seek you. I'm still going to remember your deeds, your mighty deeds. And I think it's important to just seek the Lord in those dry seasons. He wants to burn you up so bad. And so whoever's listening to this video, just seek the Lord in dry seasons. Like, the drier you are, the hotter the fire. And I promise you, I've been through seasons of life where I've been so dry, and then a couple of days later I'll just be on fire for the Lord, and it's so consuming. And then when we get on fire for the Lord, we understand how to light the fire. We understand that Jesus is the source of our fire, and when we seek him in dry seasons, he will burn us up. And I don't want you guys thinking that church on Sundays and Wednesdays is not the source of the fire. That is not the source of the fire. Jesus is. If you're dry, go to Jesus and he will fill you up. But there's people too who help you get through dry seasons. They help you, remind you of the deeds that Jesus has done in your life and how good he's been to you. So seek the Lord in the dry seasons. Seek him with all your heart, persevere in prayer, and talk to him every single day, not just on Sundays and Wednesdays. Guys, I love you so much. Have a great week. God bless you.
Wow, Mason, thank you so much. It's so incredible to know that no matter what season we're walking through, he's always with us. And whenever we go through a season that's harder, or that feels like it's dry, or we feel empty, all we have to do is lean into him. All we have to do is seek his presence. All we have to do is lift our eyes to Jesus. And he just wants to fill us right back up and light us on fire so that we can share that fire with so many other people. Thank you so much, Mason, for taking the time to share that with us. And if you're a senior and have something on your heart that you would love to share and leave behind as part of your legacy here at Vessel Youth, we would love to hear from you and love to share it with our youth group. Yay! So we are so excited for another incredible message. And before we do that, we are going to go into a time of worship and just sitting in the presence of the Lord. Thank you guys so much for hopping on, and we hope that you enjoy this time of seeking his face.
Hey, okay, so I'm super excited for tonight. As we're in 1 Kings 19, verses 9 through 14, we are going to use the SOAP method again to really dissect and understand what we're reading before we continue on in this sermon and throughout this Wednesday night. So if you don't know what SOAP is, it's just a method, an acronym to help us understand what we're reading, ask some questions to just get us thinking a little more deeper about the passage that we're in. So the SOAP method starts with S for soap, and that stands for scripture. So the first question is, what verse spoke to you? After reading this passage, if you want to jot down in a notebook or comment down below what verse spoke to you. And then moving on to O for observations. What does this passage mean? What does it say about God's character and people? And is there a sin or promise being pointed out? Is there an example being set or a command being given? So with these questions, just analyze the passage and you can jot down whatever you're seeing with S and O. And then moving on to A, which is application. How can you apply what you've read? How is it relevant today? And identify ways to live this out this week. And this would be awesome to share in the comments so we can all see how we're all living this out, ideas too, and encourage one another. And then the last one is prayer. And we want to ask God to help us use what we've learned, not only to grow personally, but to share this with other people and pray for opportunities to be able to share this with other people. So we're going to take 4 minutes to use the SOAP method and understand 1 Kings 19, 9 through 14, and then we're going to continue on. So let's take 4 minutes and hop back into this video.
Sing this out, blessed. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, and oh my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, and oh my soul, I worship your holy name. Sing that again, bless. So bless the Lord, oh my soul, and oh my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, and oh my soul, I worship your holy name. The sun comes up, the sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord. So bless the Lord, oh my soul, and oh my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, and oh my soul, worship your holy name. You're rich in love. You're rich in love and just slow to anger. Your name is great and your heart is kind. For all your goodness I will keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, and oh my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, and oh my soul, I worship your holy name. Lord, we worship you right now in your holy name, because you're the one that's worthy. Sing this and on that day. And on that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come, still my soul will sing your praise unending. 10,000 years and then forevermore, forevermore. So bless the Lord, oh my soul, and oh my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, and oh my soul, I worship your holy name. Sing bless the Lord. Sing bless the Lord, oh my soul, and oh my soul, worship his holy
am so excited tonight as we pick up on our series, Hearing from God. I've been loving this series so much because God has been teaching me so much about recognizing His voice, and I hope that you have been learning things along the way. Well, today I'm really excited for tonight's sermon because it is called this, Didn't Expect That. And we're going to be diving into 1 Kings chapter 19, and we're going to be looking at the life of this guy whose name is Elijah. And we're going to be seeing how God shows up in Elijah's life in ways that he did not expect. And I feel like so often for you and me that God will do the same thing. Is He will do things, He'll speak to us where we are like, whoa, hold up, like I did not expect that. So do you know what I mean, like whenever I say that God speaks to us in ways that we didn't expect? Well, let's break this down. Whenever something happens you didn't expect, usually this means that your reality experienced a twist to it. So I know that when some of you think of a twist, you automatically think of like a plot twist, maybe even a plot twist in a Netflix series called Outer Banks. Like think about the plot twist whenever Sarah Cameron's dad killed John B's dad and is hunting for the gold. That's a plot twist. Now sometimes whenever something that happens in your life that you didn't expect, it can lead to a frustration. Why is that? Well, I believe that there's like this formula that reality plus the expectations you put on life can a lot of times lead to frustrations. And I immediately think of a situation in the 2016 NBA Finals. If any of you guys are Cavalier fans or Warriors fans or just an NBA fan in general, I immediately think of the 2016 Finals when the Warriors were up 3-1 in the final series. And yeah, if you're a Cavs fan, you were like, I did not expect for us to come back, and guess what? We did the impossible, and we came back, and we beat the Golden State Warriors 4-3. Now, you can flip that around, and if you're a Warriors fan, you may have been thinking, hey, we were winning 3-1 in the series. Next game, I binged on all this ice cream. In fact, I didn't even watch game 5 because I just expected it to be another easy dub. But then something happened. You didn't expect for the Warriors to blow a 3-1 lead, and guess what? They did. LeBron and the Cavs ended up winning the 2016 NBA Finals 4-3. Now, sometimes people make decisions in their lives that catch us off guard in ways that we're like, I did not expect for you to do that. Now, I want you to think of something personal in your life. I want you to think of a personal moment when something happened that you just didn't expect. You got that in your mind? Okay, well, I think of this dude in the Bible. His name is Elijah, and I kind of gave it away in the very beginning. But we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 19. We're going to be talking about this guy named Elijah. And the reason I want to talk about Elijah is because there's some things that happened in his life that he didn't expect. So who is this Elijah dude? Well, Elijah is a prophet. And if you're a prophet in the Bible, or even today, it basically means that you are a messenger of God. That you have a message from God that you are delivering to other people. We also see that Elijah is a spiritual leader. And in fact, he's a spiritual leader in such an important time. And I believe that some of you guys are a spiritual leader in such an important time like right now. Okay, so let's get back to Elijah. So Elijah, he's a spiritual leader in an important time. He's a prophet. But then also, there's some attributes about himself. There are times when he was so bold. He was so confident. And there are times when it was like, man, he could take on the world. But then he also had moments in his life when he was filled with fear. He was afraid. He was discouraged. He was at times depressed. And there's also times when he was just super frustrated. So this is who Elijah is. Now before we get into 1 Kings 19, it's so important that we understand what happened in the previous chapter. So if you read 1 Kings chapter 18, you will see how God uses Elijah to confront an evil king of Israel in 1 Kings chapter 18. And the reason why he was evil is because this king was not leading the Israelites to worship God. In fact, he was leading Israelites and all other people to worship Baal, a false god. So what ends up happening in chapter 18 is Elijah and all these other prophets for Baal, they end up kind of getting into this situation where it's like, okay, whose God is real? And what ends up happening is Elijah says, all right, well, I'll let you guys call out to Baal and see if Baal answers you. So they set up an altar, and it says in the Bible that was the most perfect time for them to call out to Baal. And what ends up happening? He does not answer them. He does not even respond to them. Their God, silent. And then, this is crazy, because in 1 Kings 18, you'll see that the land was actually in a major drought. And the reason why that's important is because on this altar that Elijah builds, he ends up asking God to send fire down from heaven. But he makes it kind of tricky for God to do that, in that he dumps all this water on the altar. And it's really cool to see Elijah and how he does this, because it shows me two things. It shows, number one, that him using his water and dumping it on to the altar was a sacrifice, because they were experiencing 3 years of drought. But Elijah didn't just like drizzle just a little bit of water. Like, he completely drenched it in water. Like, there's no way that like an Eagle Scout could even start a fire on this altar. There's no way. And so next thing you know, Elijah cries out to God, and God sends fire down from heaven, and everybody ends up worshiping God. And I love this verse in chapter 18, verse 39. It says that when the people saw this, they cried out, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." And it's so cool just to see how it was. I almost imagine like everybody around just had to experience God in such a powerful way. Like, wow, like look how good God is. It was like a really big moment. God showed up in a really dramatic way. Like, it was very clear, like God showed up. And then here we are in verse 46. So it's the last verse before chapter 19. And this is what ends up happening, and it's such a cool moment for Elijah. It says, "The power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel." So Jezreel is a city. Ahab is that king who's evil. Remember, we talked about him earlier, who is leading people to worship Baal. And we see that Elijah is running to Ahab because he wants to be able to tell Ahab what has happened, that he wants to show him who the one true God is. Now, I want to point out to something in just a minute, but before we get there, I want to read a couple of verses. So in 1 Kings chapter 19, we'll start in verse 1. It says, "Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done." So Jezebel was Ahab's wife, so it's like the king and the queen. And tells Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and how he had even killed all the prophets with the sword. So yeah, like Elijah and God's people, they end up killing these people who are leading God's chosen people and other people away from God and worshiping God. So verse 2, it says, "So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, 'May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make them your life like that of one of them.' Elijah was afraid and ran." That's in verse 3. Elijah was afraid and ran. So here's the thing. A lot of times, unexpected situations or news that you didn't expect will position you to hear God's voice. But here's the biggest thing, is this. But you can miss out on God's voice when you have a distorted perspective. Our perspective gets distorted whenever we take our eyes off of God and we put our eyes on ourselves. I kind of think of this. So this is so weird. I know some of you guys are like, "Trey, what is wrong with you?" But a lot of times, whenever I drive and it starts to rain, I see how long I can go before I turn the windshield wipers on. Claire's always like, "Trey, why don't you just turn your windshield wipers on? Like, you can be able to see more clearly." But I've started to realize that whenever we take our eyes off of God and our eyes on ourselves, it's almost like you're in the driver's seat driving a car in the middle of the rain. And if you have your license and if you drive, you know what ends up happening is if you don't turn your windshield wipers on while it's raining, you cannot see out of your car, especially if it starts raining really hard. Your perspective ends up being distorted. And I just think of sometimes whenever I don't know why I do this, but I just challenge myself to how long can I go until I just can't possibly see. And there's always a moment when I have to turn on my windshield wiper so I can see clearly. And that's the thing whenever you go through an unexpected situation or whenever you receive news that was unexpected, is you can choose to just rely on yourself for as long as you want. But at some point, you got to realize that if you put your eyes on God, you can be able to see your situation more clearly. You can see God's goodness in your situation. And in fact, some of y'all might be hearing this and you're thinking, well, yeah, I was in an unexpected situation. I received these really hard news and I couldn't see my situation more clearly. So what now, Trey? Well, I would say this: keep holding on. Because when you keep your eyes on God, even through a difficult situation or a difficult circumstance, you are positioning yourself for God to be able to rescue you. But the most important thing is that you are placing your hope on a foundation that you can be so confident in. So, and let's keep going into 1 Kings chapter 19, and we're going to be in verse 4. We're going to pick up this story. And what we're going to realize here is that Elijah, kind of like, imagine that car in the windshield wiper analogy I just gave you. So we're going to realize is that Elijah ends up depending on himself rather than looking at God, and his perspective gets distorted. So remember, Elijah's afraid. He knows that the queen Jezebel is after his life. Jezebel's trying to kill Elijah. And Elijah knows that this queen has a track record of killing God's prophets. And instead of running to God, turning his eyes to God, asking God to guide him and take him to the next place, he says, no, I'm going to do this on my own. And he ends up running. A lot of times fear can cause us to run away from God and run into situations we never expected. 1 Kings 19 verse 4 says, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush. He sat down under it and he prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. What happened to Elijah? I mean, like, in his life, he has seen God do such crazy things. He saw God miraculously provide food when there was no food. He saw God raise a dead child back to life. And then, like, we just recently talked about this crazy story about how God sent fire down from heaven to show that he was the one true God and that there was no other God, not even the Baal. What had happened to Elijah? I think that he was missing out on God's voice because his perspective was so distorted. His eyes were so glued and focused to himself that he finds himself in this position of where he's saying, God, I've had enough. I've had enough. And it's like, Elijah, dude, like, remember, like, just a couple verses ago, just a few days ago, God's power came upon you. But now here he is. He's in a situation that we didn't expect. I wasn't expecting to read this verse. I wasn't expecting for him to be in this place, like, after hearing that the power of the Lord had came on him, that he would be in this place of saying, like, God, take my life. But here he is. I know some of you guys are thinking, like, yeah, our boy Elijah, he's just a little spiritually dry right now. Well, no. Like, he's in a place right now where he's just so vulnerable. Like, yeah, he might be in a spiritually dry place, but there's so much that's going on within him. There's so much going on in his soul and in his mind. When I read this story, I read it and I see that Elijah had real feelings that you and I experience today. I read verse 4 and I see that Elijah feels discouraged. In fact, he feels depressed and he's borderline suicidal. So let's jump over to verse 9. So there he went. So here Elijah is. He went into a cave and he spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him. Now, we don't know if the word of the Lord, like, I don't know if Elijah was asleep and then he had this dream, or if he had an angel that came and spoke to him, because a few verses before that we didn't get a chance to read, there was an angel that spoke to Elijah. So it says, the word of the Lord came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he replied, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They tore down your altars, and they put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left. And now, they're trying to kill me too. So here's Elijah and he's having this exchange. He's having this conversation with an angel, or maybe in his dream, he's having this exchange where he's actually showing us what's going on in his mind right now, and explaining why he's feeling the way that he's feeling. And then what's so interesting is God's response to Elijah's feelings. I think that sometimes we tend to think that God might respond in an angry way. But a lot of times, God's response to whatever difficult circumstance you are in is to, hey, come into my presence. Check this out in verse 11. It says, "The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." So picture this with me. Elijah's in a cave, but he's in a cave that's like on top of a mountain. And God is telling him, hey, step out of the cave. Like, step out of that dark place that you're feeling in right now. Like just take that step of faith. I know it might be really hard for you just to stand up. I know you're so tired right now. I know you're exhausted, but I need you to stand up and go out on the edge of the cave, and I'm about to pass by. And right now, we're about to get even more specific about when God does things that we didn't expect. We're about to look at how God will do and say things in ways that make us say, I didn't expect that. So here's Elijah, and he's about to step on the edge of the mountain as God is about to pass by. And I think that what we're seeing here with Elijah's place is even though God's about to pass by him, in his heart and in his mind, he's overlooking what God is doing in his life. And I love it because God is personally inviting Elijah to pay attention to this really sacred moment that's about to happen. But God is also replying to Elijah just to be in his presence. And some of you are too afraid to go in God's presence. I get it. God is holy, and sometimes his holiness can cause us to fear him. But because of Jesus, we can actually go into his presence with confidence. No matter what situation we're in, no matter what decision we made, no matter what mistake we may have made, no matter what people are telling you, no matter what lies are in your head, we can have this confidence that God is always inviting us into his presence. So why should you accept that? Why should you actually want to go into God's presence even if you're in a really difficult situation? Because there's this power in God's presence that you can experience nowhere else. There's this healing that you can experience in God's presence you can't experience anywhere else. So here we are. God will pass by, right? Verse 11 is where we're at. God's about to pass by Elijah. And I wanted to note this too in your life, is that God is passing by in your life. Like right now, God could literally be passing by. We know that God is in all situations. He's always present. We know that we can see him through his creation. And my question for you is this: is God passing by in your life right now, but you're overlooking it? Could God possibly be passing by in your life right now and you're just overlooking it? Well, how do you not overlook it? Like, how do you pay attention to it? You might be like, Trey, like, tell me, like, how do I pay attention? Like, what if God is literally passing by my living room right now or my bedroom right now? How do I pay attention to it? Well, we got to expect God to work even in unexpected moments, and we're going to see how God does this in verse 11 to Elijah. So then, a great and a powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came this gentle whisper. Elijah very easily could have overlooked this gentle whisper. Like when God was passing by, Elijah could have overlooked it because he could have been thinking, God, like I'm expecting you to move in like a really big way, like a very vivid way. And if I were Elijah, I would have expected God to pass by through like that powerful wind, or even through the earthquake, or even the fire. Because the very detailed and vivid and big things that God does is really easy to grab our attention. And if I was Elijah, I would have probably been up there like, all right, God, here I am. I'm staying on this mountain for you. And then here he comes by, and the strong wind, and it says he wasn't there. God wasn't there. And then this earthquake happens. God's not in the earthquake. And then this fire comes by, and it says God's not in the fire. Like, I would have been like, all right, God, like, I get it. Like, you're showing up, so you're not showing up right now in like this earthquake or wind or fire. So like, I got a dip. Like, I got some marshmallows in the cave. Like, I'm about to make some s'mores right now. That's probably would have been me. Because it's like, okay, God, if you're going to show up, you probably would have showed up in ways that I expected. But a lot of times, God shows up in our way in the small and the discreet little things. So many of us, we overlook when God is passing by because we expect God to only speak in the visible and dramatic ways. Why? Well, because the big, the visible, and the dramatic ways, they are easier to pay attention to. So when God chooses to speak in discreet and simple ways that require us to pay close and careful attention to, are you paying close and careful attention to those things? Are you paying close attention to the ordinary moments in life? Yes, I know you might be quarantined right now and you've been in your house for 37 days straight. And I know that you may be in an ordinary moment, but God might just be passing by to speak something to you, to encourage you, to show you His power, to show you His goodness, to show you His kindness. And my question is, are you paying attention to Him? Are you seeing His goodness and His grace and His love for you and the small and discreet ways? Because sometimes God can speak the biggest things to us in the smallest ways. So key takeaways in verse 12 as I was reading it was this, that Elijah was looking for God. Like, Elijah was looking for God in that moment. How do I know that? Well, the Bible said that God was not in the wind, God was not in the earthquake, God was not in the fire. So that tells me that Elijah must have been expecting God to show up in any moment. Are you expecting God to show up in any moment? Now, Jesus could literally return at any moment, but another question I have for you is, like, are you expecting God to speak something into your life at any moment? Are you positioning yourself to actually be able to hear from God? Now, just because God doesn't speak to you in the storm doesn't mean that He's not with you. And you're like, Trey, what in the world are you talking about right now? Well, in chapter 19, I love this so much. Like, there's a storm that came by. And if you read this passage really quickly, you missed it. Like, when there was a strong wind, when there was an earthquake, and when there was a fire, there was a storm that happened. And I love this because I feel like that God's trying to speak something to us that we will overlook if we don't carefully study this passage. And it's this, that just because God doesn't speak to you in the storm of your life does not mean that He has left you. He is still with you during the storm. Remember last week in the sermon, Did God Ghost Me? And we said that sometimes there are those moments in our life when we don't feel God, but just because we don't feel God, it doesn't mean that He's not here with us. Deuteronomy 31:6 assures us of that. So just because God doesn't speak to you in the storms of life doesn't mean that He's not with you. If you feel like your life right now is just one big storm and that God isn't speaking, well, don't quit on God. Keep talking to Him. And this passage should encourage you in that if you paid attention to it, you see that when the storm passed is when Elijah heard God's voice. And yes, it was really small. It was a gentle, quiet voice. So my encouragement for you today is, just because you're in a storm of life, don't quit on God. Just because you don't hear Him in the storm, know that He is with you in the storm. So let's pick back up in verse 13. So remember, God has just passed by to Elijah. And at the very end of verse 12, it said that there was a gentle whisper. And so verse 13 says this, when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face, and he went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He replied, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites, they rejected your covenant, they torn down your altars, and they put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." Guys, again, Elijah was overlooking what God was doing. And if you paid attention to this, you can see how Elijah gives the same exact response as he did in verse 10. It's literally the same exact one. And something that's important in that same exact response is something that Elijah says, and he's telling God, "I'm the only prophet that's left. I'm the only one." But here's the problem. He wasn't actually the only prophet that was left. He wasn't actually the only prophet that was still alive. In fact, there was this guy named Obadiah who was a devoted follower of God that Elijah knew. And he knew that Obadiah had taken 100 of God's prophets and had hidden them in the mountains. Why? Well, because that crazy queen was after killing them too. But because Elijah's perspective was distorted, his eyes were centered on himself. He was at this place of where he forgotten everything that was happening around him and that small little problem that he was experiencing. And yes, small problems are big deal to God. But just because you have a problem doesn't mean you can just let it distort your perspective. And you can't let it keep your eyes off of God. You got to keep your eyes always on God, because sometimes we're missing out on the big picture and what is happening. So because God will often do and say things in ways that make us say, "I didn't expect that," it means that we have to expect the unexpected in discrete and simple rhythms of life. Because sometimes God chooses to speak to us in discrete and simple ways. And it makes me think back to my freshman year in college. And some of you guys have heard this story, but I was pursuing a career in the business field. I was trying to start new companies. I was trying to start a company of creating a submarine drone. And my freshman year in college, there was a lot that was happening that was showing up on the news with these crimes and with citizens and police. And so I started talking to police officers and mayors and sheriffs, asking them, "Hey, how can we actually get video evidence of what's happening around your car?" And so that led to me wanting to create a new product. It was a new in-dash cam. And as I was creating these products, I was just doing my normal, ordinary life, freshman year of college, going to classes, doing homework. I found myself one night sitting at my desk. And as I was sitting at my desk and I was doing homework, there's this small little voice in my head. Now, it wasn't an audible voice that I could hear with my ears, but it was a voice in my head. It was really discreet, and it was really simple. And it said this: "You're going to be a pastor one day." And then immediately I heard that voice. I was like, heck no, I am not going to be a pastor. And then again, that small little discreet voice popped up in my head and said, "You're going to be a pastor one day." I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. If I do that, then I'm going to have to totally change my lifestyle. I'll have to run away from the business field, because I had built a reputation that I was going to be like the next guy on Shark Tank or whatever. And I was scared because I was like, what if I let people down? I have this reputation with not only my friends, but also my family. What happens if I actually pay attention to that small little voice? So I was like, you know what? I'm going to bury that. I'm pretending like that voice didn't even exist. That voice never even happened. Well, over the course of several weeks, people began to ask me strange questions. They were asking me, "Hey, Trey, have you ever considered being a pastor one day or going into ministry?" And I was like, where's this coming from? You know me. I want to pursue the business field. I want to be the next, Bill Gates. I want to be on Shark Tank. And I began to realize that small little voice that was in my head, that it was God's voice. That God was calling me to something different. And it was small. And it was a discreet little voice. And I wasn't doing something fancy. It wasn't like I showed up to church on Sunday and then I went up to the altar and I prayed and I was like, "Hey God, I need you to speak to me right now." And then I heard His voice. No, it was happening in the ordinary, mundane moment of my life. I was literally sitting at my desk. So we have to pay attention to what God is doing around us. We have to expect God to move in unexpected moments. The thing is that we sometimes can box God in and we can say, "Hey, God can only move in this type of way," or "Hey, God can only speak to me this certain way." But what we're learning about from the life of Elijah is that a lot of times we can be caught up in thinking that God is going to show up and speak to us in some big way. Like there's going to be this wind that's going to come up to our front door, and we're going to open it up, and then we're going to hear God's voice say, hey, I need you to go move to this country, or I need you to go pursue this career, or I need you to go speak to this person. Or some of us are like just waiting, asking God to tell us who to date. But the thing is, like, God's not always going to show up and speak to us in these big dramatic ways. A lot of times it's going to be in those small, discrete moments. Something else I realized about God is that the form in which He speaks to us can be unexpected and can leave us saying things such as, did God just do that? Like, can you imagine Elijah standing on the mountain and this wind comes through, this earthquake happens, this fire happens, but then a gentle, small voice speaks. He had to be thinking in his mind, did God just do that? Like, did God really just get my attention through a small little voice, even through silence? Like, God could have just gone through the fire or the wind or the earthquake, but did God just do that? Did He just speak to me through the small voice in the silence? And then sometimes the message that God gives us can leave us saying, did God actually just say that? Like, has God ever said to you to do something and you just look at each other like, or you look at somebody, you're like, oh my, did God just actually say that? Like, Claire and I had a moment the other week where we just looked at each other and sitting at the table and was like, did God actually just say that? That's the thing, is sometimes whenever God works in unexpected ways, He will speak to us and we will think to ourselves, did God just say that? Yeah, He probably did. He probably did just do that thing too. Because something I've learned about God is that He's so big and that we can't box Him in, and His thoughts are not our thoughts. And so sometimes we've got to be paying attention to Him doing things in the unexpected moments. So as we wrap up this passage, we're going to go into verse 18, and we're going to see something about Elijah that begins to shift from being in God's presence. In verse 18, it says, this is God's response to Elijah. Elijah just told God, I'm the only prophet that's alive. But then God says this, yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal. So I want to pay attention to this one verse because, yes, God had preserved 100 prophets, but He also had 7,000 people who did not bow down to Baal before Elijah had this moment. And I love this because God is telling Elijah, you are not alone. You're not alone. I know that you're in this really vulnerable place and your emotions in your head are whispering all these lies to you, and you're telling yourself that you want me to take your life, that you just wish your life was over, and you're saying you've had enough, you wish you were dead, but you're not alone. I'm doing so much more around you. See, just like God was showing Elijah that He is working in ways that Elijah can't see, God is wanting to show you that He is working in ways that you can't see. So whether you've quit on God or whether you are quitting on your own life, don't quit. No matter how discouraged you are, know that you can have hope that if God woke you up this morning, He still has a purpose for you. And I know that maybe you may struggle with depression. And if so, take things one day at a time. I know that waking up the next day can seem so overwhelming. And maybe you personally can relate to Elijah's depression. Maybe you can't. I don't know. But something that I realized from Elijah is that his depression probably came from his perspective in which the lens he saw things, but also the amount of anger and the harsh words that were spoken over him that led him to this depressional state. In verse 19, we read that Elijah ends up, it says Elijah went from there and found Elisha. And I read that verse and I see that Elijah was able to stand up, get back on his feet, and to go back to where the queen was. Elijah's emotional conditions are now encouraged. He feels affirmed. He has direction. And most importantly, we see that God has healed his heart to keep going. So this is why we draw near to God, because there's always more to the story, and he's trying to direct our hearts. He's trying to direct our hearts to proper worship. Even in times of the life where it feels like, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect God to show up in this way. God is constantly all around us, and he's wanting to draw us into him. He's wanting to draw us near. He's trying to get our hearts to him, to worship him. But here's the thing that I love about God is that he doesn't force us to go to him. Just like with Elijah, is that he will show up and do amazing things in our lives and will show us his goodness and his kindness through his word, to align our hearts to his, to realize that, hey God, like I need you in my life. I need to be in your presence. Your presence is where I experience healing. Your presence is where I experience hope. Your presence is where I experience purpose. Your presence is where I find life. So if you are following Christ, I want you to pay attention to those ordinary moments. I want you to pay attention to those unexpected moments. I want you to pay attention to the simple, small little moments in your life, because God could be speaking to you through those moments. Now, if you don't follow Christ, I want to encourage you to take Elijah's story and see what happened. See the change that Elijah experienced in his life from being in God's presence. The same can happen for you. The Bible says, literally, you just go to God just as you are, and he welcomes you with open arms. And when you go to God, he changes your heart. You now have eternity secured. You are back in a relationship with your Creator. He loves you so much. God, I just pray for everybody who is watching this and wherever they're watching it from. God, I pray that you would help them to hear your voice. God, I pray that in the unordinary moments or the unextraordinary moments, God, I pray that they would pay attention to what you're doing in every single second, every single minute of every single day. God, you woke us up all for a purpose. So God, help us to pay attention to that. God, I pray that you would just be working in our hearts, line us up to yours. God, I pray that you would help us just to trust you more. God, I pray that you would send a revival, pour out your spirit to everybody that's watching this. Give us a word, God. Strengthen our faith. God, encourage us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey y'all, before we close out, we have a couple announcements to make. First off, if you don't follow us on Instagram, go ahead and give us a follow. It's vessel_YTH. You'll have all the announcements and updates right there, so you never have to miss anything. The next announcement is that we are doing a Tootsie Slide challenge. So if you submit a video of you doing that, we're going to select one for a winner. And then if you are a senior, we want you to know that we want to celebrate you, and we're so excited that you're graduating now, and that you have plans coming up for your future, and we want to be able to share our excitement and celebrate that with you. So if you send us a picture of you wearing your college apparel or holding a flag or something like that, we can post it on our Vessel page and just have everyone celebrate together. And so we want you to know that you are so incredibly loved, and if you ever need anything, let us know. You can always DM us, text us, get in touch with us if you need prayer, if you have prayer requests, whatever it may be. So I hope you guys have a really great week, and we'll see you next week. Make sure to tell your friends to tune in on YouTube Live at 6 p.m. for our Vessel Nights Live. We love you guys. Bye.